how can you be authentic and conscious if all you're doing is reacting?
I love that too. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the proactiveness and the deliberateness of it really speaks to me. Just to say a little bit more about my issue with the word intention, I think in our culture, our Western culture, I'm not from the US, but of course, Northern Europe, there's a lot of shared values and practices. I feel like we get away, or think we get away, too easily when somebody is hurt by saying, well, but I didn't mean it that way. So, I don't know, this was a big part, is still a big part of discussions in the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I didn't mean to exclude you, so it's okay that I did, almost. Like it's like an excuse to get out of things. My intention was not to hurt you. That is, the better thing to say is, I'm so sorry I hurt you. And to validate that, even though maybe you didn't mean to. But I think we've all been probably on the receiving end of that as well. Having been told, yeah, it was not my intention to hurt you, but that doesn't fix, I don't know, there's just I don't know, whatever. I'm going to stop talking now, but.
No, I think you make a critical point. Again, we're circling around this topic that there is no such thing as conscious leadership without authenticity and naming what's really going on. And that was a case where using intention that way is not naming what's really going on about accountability.
So a question I have, I feel a lot of the sessions we did were maybe focused on our personal journey, and if culture is much more about the collective, I'm wondering, what did you get from the sessions that got at the collective journey? How do you move systems? How do you move organizations together? I think it was embedded, but I'd love to draw that out maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe this ties a couple of things together, your question, Lyndon, but also the framing question you asked, and the very first question you asked. For me, in the work we do at the Kellogg Foundation, there is a desire to shift from, and I saw it in your session as well, the me to we, the I to us, and that notion that somehow the I gets lost in the we is a false notion. I need to bring the best of myself, but even the best of myself is still in development. And I had the conversation with my partner when we were staring deeply into each other's eyes around how there could be a misconception that I think I've arrived because I have a title or certain knowledge or expertise or experience, but the reality is, no, I've not arrived, and I proclaim that. And every single person in this room and online has contributed to my ongoing development. So kind of to your point, Chris, it's in the journey, right? But there's a willingness to stay on the journey. And sometimes there's an unwillingness to even embark on the journey. So I think for me, part of the leadership development space is around how do you encourage everybody to get on their leadership development journey? Because all of us are leaders. There's a myth around leadership, like somehow it's reserved for people with title and authority, but in fact, it's for everybody. Everybody can be a leader, but you have to start with self. And then to your point, Lyndon, to go through those transformation, those stages of vertical development, it goes beyond the skills, knowledge, and expertise. Now I'm actually pushing myself into spaces and places that are very uncomfortable. And that discomfort produces experiences that I then make sense of with great people like yourselves to say, okay, now what do I do with this? Because I'm struggling, or this made sense and that didn't. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have a clarity about what do I do next. Again, asking those powerful questions of myself and others asking them of me to be able to discern what's next for me. What can I manage? What's truly in that space of ongoing development? And at some point, and this is why I love working with senior leaders in particular, because I know if we can shift that thinking from the me to we, I to us, they can influence their organizations and bring other people along that journey. So now we're impacting a larger system beyond the individual. It's those that they work with and lead and support in their own journeys, and hopefully encourage that level of development. And that's why I have deep appreciation for my CEO, Lejeune, in that she made a commitment. We're doing leadership development at all levels of the foundation, not just title leaders. Everyone gets some measure of development. And that's the journey that we've embarked on at the foundation, and then taking that into the fellowship program, taking that into community. So thinking about, you know, when we can get people thinking about what's the best of me that I bring in relationship to you, and then thinking about the ecosystem in which all these challenges and opportunities exist for us as a society, and then coupling the best of ourselves with the, you know, in relationship to these issues, and slowly we can make the progress that's needed. And hopefully we can accelerate it if we truly develop everyone as leaders. And the last thought I have there is, what's the message that we send to children? So again, to Misa's point, you brought up the image that I brought up around planting seeds. In my mind, I'm trying to plant seeds for the generations that are coming, to say to them, we care about you, we're concerned about you, we're going to try and do better by you. And in some respects, the existing generations, how do we come alongside you? What do I need? What can I do for you so that you can be the most effective leader in the space that you find yourself to, again, impact the larger society in which you live?
Thank you, Paul. So this is the concept of the cascade and the ripple approach into culture, which certainly seems like something I can conceive of and imagine. I was very struck by the discussion and the circle that drew the other. There was the I, the we, and very often my issues show up around the other, which is the group it seems like my influence is very far away from, and yet I depend on them in some way. So I wonder if anybody has any thoughts or strategies to the concept of our impact of conscious leadership on culture and creating that culture.
So I think that one thing that's really been sitting with me is the seed, and how it relates to youth and young adults, their leadership. How does all of this conscious leadership translate to youth? And for me, the awareness part comes in when I was taught a long time ago, working with youth and youth development, you have to be okay with being a seed planter. And understanding there's a process that happens from the time that you plant the seed to the time that you reap a harvest. And you have to be okay that a lot of the seeds that we plant in young people, we're not going to see necessarily for myself, within those 4 years that I know them, or within the 18 years you might have with your child, right? These are things you might see develop over time. So being okay with that, and being still committed to watering and nurturing those skill sets of leadership and consciousness, modeling that even when springtime comes and there's no harvest, still modeling that and still saying, I'm committed to really watering this. I'm really committed to really setting this example for you so that you can see it. So when the harvest does come, if I'm not there, you can still reap that. And so I struggle with that a lot. And I find that struggle happens a lot in that circle of others, because that's the group you don't necessarily always see your impact with. And that's the other part of it. You don't see the impact with that seed. So I'm losing my train of thought, but that is that's how I kind of, for me, I look from the outside in. So I'm always self-aware, but at the same time, I'm self-aware on the notion that, or not the notion, I'm always thinking, what is the impact I can make in the world that the others can feel that I don't have to see? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I build on that? And I wanted to ask the question maybe to Brooke, because in the social justice space that you work in, it's sometimes pushing against systems, against power structures, and perhaps the inherent recognition in conscious leadership is to co-create with the others, not see them as enemies and us against them, which is sometimes the prevailing paradigm. So how do we get to that state of kind of transcending those very difficult boundaries, because it feels like that's the very significant challenge.
You're asking me how we reconcile us and them? Okay. Okay, I'm not going to answer that directly, but I think in this culture conversation, there's, again, another frame, is that we work within systems to transform them from the inside out, or we work outside systems to transform them. And I'm personally these days very interested in working outside of the prevailing or dominant systems. That be not to say that the other models aren't effective, but I'm a little bit tired. There's automatically a consent to playing within the system. To some degree, I'm consenting to abiding by these rules with some hope of transforming it. And I think a lot about the impact, maybe even unconscious or often unseen, that consenting to play that same game also has. I think it might be naive for me to think I can be in a system and see all the games and not be impacted by it. I'd still be consenting to a model of profit, a model of extraction, a model of exploitation that I try as much as I can in my day-to-day to stop consenting to, right? So I'm very interested in, like, what are the alternative cultures that are trying to really get off the ground, where within those, we are learning to build new capacities and skills together. Some that maybe have been lost because we've been so used to playing in this sort of dominant game. So what does it look like to imagine those other systems, but then build the collective capacity to realize those? Like, and this is the gap for me. It's one thing to imagine, like, oh, we can develop alternative models to education, alternative models to extractive economic systems. And then oftentimes at the work of courage, we're working with others trying to get like a solidarity economy off the ground, a new political party off the ground. And the same dynamics of power, trauma, injustice show up there if we're not careful in practicing something else. So my interest is like, what does it take? And I think the field is actually really, the field I'm in, I don't know what field we're all in. There's so much inner work. Like, there's so many models of inner development, and I think that that's lifetime work. There's also a lot of new models of relational development, but I think that's still at a certain level of collective practice. I don't see very many collective models of embodied transformation. I think people are talking about it, but I don't feel it in this robust way in practice, and I think that's a really, really, really rich direction of work. Like, what does it look like to collectively shift culture in the body and to feel that? Yeah.
I think, sorry. Yeah.
I wanted to ask that question back of you. Like, if you imagine what they could look like, what could that look like? The collective practices to transform systems through embodiment. I think that's what you said. But I'm curious, like, what is an association?
I'll give you an example of what we've been playing with, because like you, it's a little bit theatrical and so we tasted a little bit of what we do with this idea of shaping, where we invited folks who were here on Tuesday to try on this idea of what does it look like to inhabit this mindset of scarcity? What does the world look and feel like? What do you think is possible, et cetera? And that's still, we did that in our own bodies, but we were imagining culture, right? Then we can come together and imagine what it feels like you and I could embody scarcity or embody distrust was another example, and like act from that. And we're still playing at a relational level, like how does shaping impact us? I'm interested in what does it look like for all of us to really inhabit that scarcity mindset and act, like what does it look like to move from that for several days? And then what does it take to start to shift to maybe an abundance mindset? Is it the frame? Is it people starting to move and practice in different ways? Is it how we organize space? Like for folks to start to feel through the body that transformative journey. That's not just like, I'm now gonna act in this way. Well, how do we co-shift? And it's not, for me, it's like, there's not this reality out here that I'm reacting to. We're all co-creating that. So how do we get conscious enough of that together and start to play and literally shift into something else? And I think this happened during COVID, like not for everyone, but for a lot of people, there was a slowdown. There was a sense of like, we don't have to work at this pace. There was a lot of conversations as rest, as resistance, and culture of urgency. And then we snap back. Many people snap back. Well, what would it have looked like to practice that sense of rest on a collective level, that it's like, oh, a new kind of cultural norm is being born here? That's the level of collective practice I'm really interested in figuring out.
I think Shanti
Thank you
has
for
a
that. I'd like to make
reaction.
sure
Yes.
we catch, Shanti has something about this
We'll go to
courageous.
Shanti, and then I think Sandip wants to jump in as well, and then I think Steve, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Lyndon, I think it's a great question when we're talking about systems and when you talk about leaders that are responsible for informing and or inspiring and really in some instances casting down the mandate of this is what needs to happen in the system. And one very practical thing that I'll share with you, having been like the lead of inclusion and diversity at two large organizations, one being 240,000 employees, another being 180,000, to even the one I was recently at, which was about 12,000 employees. And the conversation that I was constantly having with those CEOs was, tell me why we shouldn't do something. What would keep us from exploring? Like just asking the question to really understand from the leader what their understandings are, what their fears are, or just if they simply just don't want to do something. And that for me was able, it put me in a position to be able to unlock, are you just coming against this opportunity to collectively bring people together in harmony, or are you coming against this experience that you want all your leaders to have a leadership development program that's going to help them grow as leaders in your organization? Why would we not do it? And what that allowed for was a different exchange, because that shifted ownership and accountability back to them to be able to answer, oh, well, it's not the right time. And so then we have to unlock that. Or the amount of money and the budget and the expense that maybe comes with doing these different programs. Or I don't know enough, right? And when we get to those level of questions, then I'm able to, as a leader who's within a system, right, that's trying to impact a collective group of individuals towards creating more inclusive, belonging experiences within a particular team. Now I've been able to unlock with the leader, who's ultimately the persons that I'm partnering with, right, to make these decisions, for them to have shared ownership and accountability with a decision of either not now, or I need more information, or you're right, I was coming from a place of fear and lack of understanding, and you're creating the space for me to be able to understand more and experience with you. And Brooke, one thing I can say that I did in the organization is I use interactive theater. I brought in an interactive theater group. I gave them a number of different situations that were occurring inside of our organization. And I had the interactive theater group. We brought in all of our leaders across the organization that were impacting, right, and making decisions, to see ourselves through interactive theater. The reason I did that is because we're human beings. We have to experience something different. We have to see things in front of us, sometimes to move us to a different mindset, and or even to move us to being willing to understand something new and different. And interactive theater was just one way, again, for me, the leader, to influence, right, a position on the importance of creating these spaces of inclusion and diversity. But I conclude with just simply saying that, Linda, for me, I've just had to frame and ask questions of leaders in different ways in order for them to have a shared level of accountability of why we wouldn't consider doing something, as an example. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. That's helpful, and it shows also how very much influence coaches can have by bringing these new thoughts and by bringing experience in a safe learning environment. I think, Shanti, that's one of the critical things that you've just been sharing as a way to influence culture from where we are. There was another.
I really appreciate that too. I know that sometimes we might not think of ourselves as a coach, right? Some of us are naturally thinking of ourselves as a coach when we have conversations, but I feel like if we want to really help create cultures in organizations, in our communities, we have to believe that we're a leader. As you said, we're a leader of self. And it's almost like what you just said, Shanti, resonated because it's almost like, if we reframe, right, think bigger, yes, we can be coaching, but it's just about having one conversation at a time. We can make a difference by just asking a different question, by engaging someone, really listening, and that was what we've been practicing, right, over the 2 days. I just want to mention that, and that really resonated with me. So thank you, Shanti. And I know we want to go to Sandeep, and I know we have people who joined us here in the room too, so we'll go to Sandeep, and then I know it's really late for you, so I want to make sure he's in I think he's like 11 a.m. or p.m. already, your local time. So come on in.
8:30? Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I learned so much during these last 4 days. Thank you so much for creating such a wonderful summit to all the organizers and the participants. Um, One thing which I realized, I was being interviewed in just a week back. I was in an interview, and the topic was igniting conscious leadership. And after the entire interview happened, there was a Q&A round, and one participant was a leader, corporate leader. He said that never ever our intentions are wrong, but still we go wrong. So if we're talking about intentionality, our intentions are never wrong. That is what he said. So where do we go wrong? So, and then I gave an example. I said that you might be having different kinds of conversations with your colleagues, subordinates. What if you don't realize the way you are talking to them? One of them might feel offended, but for you, it is a normal way of conversation. And he said yes, and he accepted that this has actually happened to me. That I was having a conversation, and for me, it was a normal tonality. And after that discussion got over, one of my colleagues who were fairly little senior to the others, she came to him and said that, your tonality was not good. So many a times, the point that I'm trying to make here is we don't have that acceptance and forgiveness. We have spoken about intentionality, self-awareness, empowerment, healthy team culture, all that. But somewhere we miss out on that acceptance, and that also happens because of the lack of self-awareness. So that lack of self-awareness which happens, uh, and that makes us go on the other side where we hurt someone and we don't even realize. So that, and when we realize, it might be too late. So being a conscious leader also, also urges us to be aware about where we go wrong, and when we realize that, have that acceptance and that forgiveness to self as well as others, because forgiveness is not only about forgiving others, it's also about forgiving myself. Don't feel guilty beyond a point. So this is something I think in the entire piece of conscious leadership, I think this acceptance and forgiveness will also play a role, because we all feel we are being intentional. I mean, right intentions. We are being self-aware, mindful about everything. We are unique and we are contributing. But the thing is, this is something which is a soft thing, which can which can recede to the background. So this is something which I wanted to just add on and share here.
Thank you, Sandeep. It is really important. And I think underlying that is the idea that we are not taking our intention out like an arrow out of a bow to get to our actions and our final goal. It's more like it sets a direction, and then you have to load it up with some fuel again and see where you are and keep trying. So you're not without direction, if I'm understanding you right.
Yes,
But
yes.
through forgiveness, you actually, and acceptance, you say, here's where I am. Now, where do I think I need to be next? You know, so there's that course correction. We have some people who've joined us, and I'd love to let some of the new folks speak as well. But Mies, if you've got something quick you want to add, please go for it.
Well, I actually wanted to ask Steve and Lynette what's on your minds.
I was invited by Paul to join the circle when Lyndon asked a question, and if I recall, did you actually use the word enemies when you're, yeah. So that's when Paul invited me over, because as we were having breakfast this morning, we were talking about dispute resolution and conflict resolution. And so I think that's what you wanted me to address. And it's interesting because I had an incredibly great fortune to spend a lot of time with Roger Fisher and Bill Urey, who wrote the seminal book, Getting to Yes, and started the Harvard Negotiation Project. And one of the things that they taught a lot of us, and a lot of you are familiar with the 4 win-win principles. And the first win-win principle is simply, focus on don't attack the person, attack the problem jointly. Number 2, don't get hung up on your initial demands, the positions that you take. Rather, find out what your interests, or be very explicit about what your interests, concerns, and needs are, and discover what the needs, concerns, and interests are of the other person that you might be having a dispute with. And start off, we often want to start off with, what are the joint goals that both parties or both people have? What do we have as common goals? What are our mutual interests? 9 times out of 10, when I'm working with groups that are having some kind of dispute, they have never discovered their mutual interests. So we always start there. Even countries that are at war have lots of mutual interests. Roger Fisher and Bill Urey were very successful in helping people stop wars. They stopped the fighting between the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland using these win-win principles. In South Africa, when Nelson Mandela and his group he came out of jail, and that group was going to assume the government role, they went down there and taught them the win-win principles. A lot of people expected a bloodbath and a civil war, and they didn't, because they took the time to really discuss what is it that we have as mutual interests. Does that make sense, everybody? And so that's what we want to do, even with people who we might perceive as enemies. We have to take a look at what do we have in common, because people are shocked at how much, in a pleasant way, pleasantly shocked at how much we have in common. So thank you, Paul.
Just to, I think, Steve, maybe quickly build on what you shared, as well as Sandeep. I was touched earlier this week when I was talking with, in one of our table discussions, and I think it was, maybe it was Lyndon, Chris, myself, and Mike, and I had said something that, as Chris reflected, he's like, oh, that made me bristle, or I felt like an emotional reaction to that. And what I appreciated was this, I don't know exactly what words it was that kind of evoked his reaction, but his consciousness to be able to identify it, but also raise it in a way that I didn't feel judged, I didn't feel bad for what I said. It was an opportunity for me to then actually start to inquire and to learn more. Is he very appropriately in this conscious way kind of reacted. And I think tolerance is a virtue that's lost in our world today. And so, obviously a lot of the principles that you're talking about, but just that exchange was awesome, because we still don't know each other really, really well, and yet there was this tolerance that existed as he reacted, and wasn't in a way that creates conflict, which I think lots of times we do. We just lean into, the human instinct to react, defend, and whatnot. And so I just think that's a critical thread of conscious leadership that I saw exhibited this week.
Yes, and I think tolerance, from my perspective and my experience, I feel like tolerance is something that a lot of leaders lean into more than understanding. It's one thing to tolerate somebody, it's one thing to understand. And I think that a lot of people lean on tolerance as, I don't know how to word it. I think a lot of people lean on tolerance as their way of getting out of the crutch. Thank you. And so certain things, when certain things are said, I think just from my own experience, they just impact a little differently, right? So when we look at like the win-win and understanding mutual sides of things, it's like there's one, it depends on the setting. It depends on the setting. And as a community leader, someone who works in Newark as well as New York City, Baltimore as well, sometimes when we're having these conversations, sometimes the question that pops up in the back of my head, and I'm going to just say it, I'm kind of nervous in saying it, but I'm going to say it. As conscious leaders, sometimes I wonder if people understand their privilege in being able to approach or to respond as the leader you are. Like there's still a level of privilege that you're afforded in understanding someone else's issue with you or finding that common interest, right? When sometimes that moment of finding commonality is not something I need, nor do I want. And so I think sometimes it's hard as a conscious leader to be conscious of that, not be offensive in it, but just realize that when I show up as a Black leader, I show up as a Black male, I show up as a Black gay male. So depending upon where I go, that will also impact my ability to accept someone's tolerance and be okay with it, or demand their understanding. Because sometimes your tolerance isn't enough for me. And then sometimes understanding our commonality, I came in already knowing the commonality. So therefore, I don't want to spend time trying to enlighten you on the commonality. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you.
Sort of seems like the difference between inclusion and belonging, between tolerance and true acceptance of where a person really is. Lynette, you joined us, and then I would like to also shift to another question to make sure we get to do that.
It's more an observation or a feeling I'm having, as we're on the sort of final capstone of the summit. We're all trained to be in space. We have that privilege. We're all trained to understand people and help them get to it from somewhere to somewhere else. And I wonder in our own journey here as a collective or as individuals, if we've been uncomfortable enough these last few days. I haven't seen people squirming enough. Have I seen people, like that word tolerate, like I don't like hearing that word. It's almost like, I think Joe early was saying the thermostat versus the thermometer. Now, I like this word of, I use allergic reaction. It's like, if I'm having an allergic reaction to a situation, a person, I think there's always something for me to learn, even if I don't like it. Like there's something mirroring there. It's a reminder somehow of something. Maybe it's my inner work, maybe it's something I haven't resolved from something else. And I'm not that word, the fact that you need to say that the world tolerates how you come in or who you are coming in, it like breaks my heart. And so I'm just kind of sitting with that because it's not like the first time I've heard something like that or felt something like that. And, you know, to Brooke's point, you know, we're all working. It's like we're finding ways to dance in the space we've been given. And I wonder what it would look like to dance in, like, kind of like flipping the table over and making our own, just rethinking things in a more radical kind of way.
Thank you, Lynette. If I might, I'm going to shift to an AI question. It's another one that actually came very close to mine. So we won't, I think it's kind of interesting what that says. No telling. But just to kind of bring this to the actionable level as we're getting ready to move out back into our worlds, were there any specific themes? Well, actually what it was is, what unanswered question do you really, really want to work on finding the answer to for yourself and perhaps to bring back to the Leadership Forum in the future? So this is like, it's not a negative perspective. It's like, where have you gone that built the platform where you can now ask that question? And I'd like to make sure that we have plenty of come over here, please, and join us. This circle is just getting bigger. Yes, be ready.
Okay, thank you so much for finally bringing me in. I think for me, I will speak from a perspective of a not so young, but young person. And when I look around the room and I see more experienced, more older people, one question that comes to my mind is, how are we transferring the wealth of knowledge that we have, the wealth of experience that we have amassed over the years, all of this knowledge, all of these things, where are they going to? How are we consciously ensuring that the next generation of young people are going to continue what we have started? This beautiful work that we are doing, not just as a collective here, but in our own organizations. How are we consciously mentoring other people? How are we consciously transferring that to ensure that our work doesn't end with us? And that's something that I am very conscious about. For me, and in my work, we have done, I work at the University of North Carolina, and I work with, we do a lot of development things around the world. I've had the opportunity to work around 12 countries. And when we go around those countries to engage with them in our development work, one of the questions that we often ask, and which I want to challenge us to also ask in our various work, is who is not on the table? Most of the times we ask who is on the table, but I like to flip that question to who is not, and whose voice is not being heard, and who is not being seen. Because most of the times we care about who is being seen, who is being heard, and who is on the table. But if we flip the question to whose voice is not being heard, who is not being seen, and who is not on the table, I think it goes a lot of ways in helping us knowing who should come in and how do we ensure that we transfer, we're getting the best out of that sitting, and also we're able to sustain the beautiful work that we are doing.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Daniels. Now, Rebecca has just joined the circle over here, and then I'm certainly going to want to see if we can get some inputs also from our Zoomers.
So I've been holding some thoughts in my head and trying to be very patient, which was my skill that during the intervision or the action planning exercise. And well, I'm looking at you because when you were talking about the youth, it brought up something that I've been thinking about throughout the entire conference, which I've talked to some people about, is like, where are the youth? Like, one of the most impactful leadership forum summits I went to was when everyone who was there probably remembers Paige, a 15-year-old, and a group of students who questioned, like, who challenged us and said, you know, like, why don't you give us the space to talk? Like, why aren't you giving us the chance to hear our ideas? So when I hear, like, I was thinking about, as I was sitting there, before you even came up, I was thinking about your question about, like, who's not at the table. And so, and I'm looking at Daniel's. And so I do think a lot about the youth as a mom of two, I should say almost teenagers. I have one that's going to be 16 next month and a 12-year-old. You know, I'm constantly having conversations with them about things that I'm doing and that I'm learning about and just about life, and I'm learning so much from them. Like, they are my teachers. And so I had this idea as I was sitting over there thinking, like, what if the youth helped us co-create the next summit? Like, what if we actually had them on the planning board? And what if, like, they were sitting here teaching us? Because I think we need just as much mentoring as they do. Like, yes, we can share, and that's the we, but we have so much to learn from them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me ask either if you'd like to keep going on that thread, which is a particular group that's not at the table, it's coming out, or others who might be missing from the table, or another unanswered question about creating the culture, the conscious leadership culture that we need. Please, and I'd love to invite some of our Zoomers, if you've got some thoughts, this is the time for it.
Anyone? Sue, Alan, John? Anybody else who wants to jump in? And people, Ken, Johanna,
Yeah. Unanswered
Matthew,
questions.
Rich, any thoughts?
Boy, I can share a little bit.
And you
I
go.
think that,
Yes, there's a lot of room in the circle.
okay. Thank you. And then we can go to Alan too. What couple of the things, and I think this is somewhat answering your question, Miriam. But what I was thinking as everyone was talking is that this unanswered question about intention, and I'm so glad we brought it up. I'm gonna continue thinking about it. One of the things that first comes to my mind is that when I think bigger about intention, I'm really trying to include the concept of impact, because I think it's both of those together is where the miracles happen and where the magic happens. Because I think someone said it really well. Our intentions could be amazing, but that shouldn't let us off the hook if we're not having the impact that our intention was supposed to have. So those two concepts in my brain are starting to meld, because that is where the magic happens. And I think it's about awareness. And that's why I love how it's awareness, intention, and impact, and those all swirl together, because we have to make sure that our impact is matching our intention. And I think that's really important. I also love the concept of us constantly thinking about the voices who are not in the room. Because, you know, we're all taught as facilitators or leadership or leaders that we have to hear all the voices in the room, which is still the case. And I think that if we can reserve some space for the voices who are not in the room, it starts really expanding and allowing us all to think bigger. So those are two of my comments. The one last thing I just want to add, and this is just a nod to the history of the leadership forum, I have to share, this is a nod to you, John Harvey and Joel and everybody. But John, I don't know if you remember this, but this is Morse Hall, which is where a lot of the past leadership forums lived. And it has a beautiful quote in here about be the change you wish to see in the world, which is, and John sent this to me. Thank you so much, John. But it's something that's my favorite quote. It means a lot to me. And I feel like this summit is all about going first. And we have to be the change that we wish to see in the world. And we have to have that awareness, that intention with the impact, and then do the action. So I love that. And then just a last nod is that I also have it on my coffee mug. I don't know if you guys could see that, but I also have it on my coffee mug. And this is something that I kept from my dad who passed away a few years ago. So he's here with us today as well.
And just if I can, just to reference that point in history, because a lot of you are very new to the forum, is that what Sue is referring to was the 99th forum, and we were getting ready for 100th. And frankly, there were many of us that questioned whether we would survive. And there was a question on the table at one point of should we keep fighting for it or should we let it die? Right. And so what we did do is I think, Joel, we probably provided scholarships. So I'm going to say 12 or 15 to 22-year-olds and let them participate in the program. And then at the end of the program, the Friday of the program, they presented their thoughts. And I would say that and leadership of Joel and everybody you've seen in the room since then has kept this flowing. And it was a point where it was 50-50 whether this forum would continue. And I knew, and we all knew we would get 100 people for 100th forum up at Leadership Forum, but we didn't know if we'd get anywhere near that for the 101st. So a tribute to the leadership team but there's different ways of doing it. And I think that was a key to our survival, tapping into the young people.
Thank you for that perspective. And it's important, you're right. History matters, and history is part of every frame. We all came in with different assumptions. We all came in with a different understanding of what's the possibilities and what questions were okay to ask and how to be present in the space based a lot on our history. And I was fascinated by the imparting of culture because I realized pretty soon that something that had been going on for 106 years had another level of life to it. And we have to think about that also when we think of our intentions and how we move into systems, to your point, Steve, and bring consciousness of a different level to them or allow them the chance to reflect on their own consciousness. You had a thought, I think, Ken, you joined us.
I felt like I owed Daniels an answer, not a profound answer, just my answer. I'm at this kind of privileged point in my career where I've rediscovered that I can actually do my job, that I can actually, I'm a software developer, I can actually write code, which is shocking at my age, honestly. And my best answer to your question of how to include other people, for me right now, is to actually work with them on stuff. And like day to day, spend time with them, treat them as equals, which I have to get over a lot of my own self to do, because you come with a lot of ego in this, and listen to them, collaborate with them, and build things with them. And that's the best I can do right now.
Can I just build up on what is said? The other thing that I was, sorry. The other thing I was thinking about while I was sitting over there before was Ken's leadership. So one of the greatest things I learned from you, Ken, when we worked together was just the importance of involving the people that you're going to impact. So Ken, as a leader, made a decision that anytime we were going to make a decision as a leadership team, that we needed to involve the people who were going to be impacted. So we made that a practice, that we actually went to, oftentimes we would go to the managers as like the representatives of the community to get their insights before we implemented a decision and to hear their perspective. And then we even took it further. Like I can remember when I first joined Stride, where I worked with Ken, we had like some pushback around some decision we had made. It was just something like, honestly, I hadn't even thought about like the perspective that the most junior people in the company were making. But because Ken created this like psychological safety in the organization and was very intentional about the fact that we could invite that conversation. We did. We invited them to be part of the conversation. They all showed up, and we had a dialogue about what their concerns were. We just really listened to what they had to say, and then we worked with some of them to address their concerns. And I think like that allows, speaking of like tolerance versus understanding and like acceptance, like we created I believe a system, a culture where people felt safe to challenge us. It was actually one of our core values, was to challenge systems. And so we created the space for them to be able to challenge us, and then we listened to what they had to say, and then we co-created, you know, solutions together. And I found that every single time that we did that, it always produced like the best solution or the most collective success. And sometimes it was just a lack of awareness of what was going on, like for us as leaders and what was happening in the organization. So sometimes it was like us sharing some more information. We had a very transparent culture. But I just think that at the core, it's about having conversation. If we take the time to hear each other and have conversation and dialogue, the possibilities for success, collective success, are limitless.
Part of leadership, even a little leadership like trying to run a circle, and I'm sure all of you have been in my seat before, is noticing. And one of the things I appreciate is I was really pretty good with noticing who was joining our circle, and I've seen some more here physically, and I got help, which is a beautiful thing, in noticing a hand up over on the Zoom. So it takes all of us. Sometimes leaders really do need that kind of help to notice. Alan, could you please share a little bit? I see your hand up.
Hi there. Yeah, building on Lynette's comments about the absence of squirming. The other thing that seemed to be missing for me from the forum is the absence of discussions about developing leaders in an era when facts don't seem to matter and misinformation rules. And I'm not just talking about the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Hannitys, and the Fox News. I've seen plenty of examples where people on the political left are just as quick to ignore facts in front of their faces because it doesn't fit their narrative.
So you're right. That's again a frame of a culture, and that we have to work into. And I'm sure that, you know, Steve in his negotiations has had to deal with times when it seemed like facts in a more microcosm way, where facts didn't really matter to one group or the other, and had to help them refocus on what it was they were trying to co-create. To your point, Rebecca, that's the essence of another form of leadership, right? Now you joined us, Stephanie, and I did notice.
Would you like to go first?
Ladies first.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share, as this is my first time participating, and I'm not a trained coach, and the embodied experience has been so unique because everyone in this room is very steady, right? You all are very mindful. You hold yourselves in a way that you don't experience in the corporate world. And there's security and freedom in that, right? It allowed us to be curious. It allowed us to play around with Mace's format, right? In like a really mature and professional way that you don't always get to experience. And I'm not sure you all realize that because you have embodied this conscious leadership and this coaching mentality for a long time. And it was like such a pleasure to come in and like feel, like just feel that and feel safe within it to like learn and be fairly new to this. And so I think that within the cultures and the communities and even the people that aren't at the table, you know, taking the breath, figuring out where you are from a trust perspective, where you're standing from a framing perspective, like just doing that in the 5 minutes or the 15 minutes or the 1 hour that you're meeting with the people that you're meeting with starts to make that change, right? Because we're talking about like, how do we bring this back? Where do we make the change? Unfortunately, in the 26 years that I've worked in corporate, there's been some really toxic, like terrible dynamics, right? And even when I'm trying to be conscious, it's impossible when there's nobody else in the room that's taking a breath, right? So So I think for me, that's what I'm taking back. And I think that maybe most of you don't realize that you carry that with you everywhere you go, and it's been really beautiful to witness that. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
My head is swimming with different thoughts about, different things that people had shared. I want to give a shout out to the people who are out there online. I see some longtime friends out there and some new faces. This is wonderful to be in the room. I'm sure it's enjoyable to a certain degree there in your comfort of your homes, but would love to have you all, when next time possible, to have you all here again so we can give you hugs live and in person. A couple things. You had spoken about planting seeds, my friend, and I think, I don't know the exact proverb or line, but there's somewhere it's written, I'm sure somebody here in the room knows, like we all stand in the shade of seeds that have been planted by men and women before us that never saw the output of that effort. And so it'd be nice to really say, to have a definitive thing for all the time and energy we've put into this room and with each other to say, oh, here's that output. But we may or may not ever see that, right? And we have to learn to be comfortable with that ambiguity of, have we made a difference, have we not made a difference? And just have the faith that with the right intention, that it will bear fruit for someone down the way, right? Also, to build on Chris's thing about being aware, I had a bit of a bristle when Daniel said, hey, you old people in the room, how are you going to pass it forward? And somehow I thought he was talking directly to me. So I did a few deep breaths, and I've gotten beyond that. One of the things that maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not, but some of the work that we're doing, Leading Human is a company that I formed with a partner, Sarah Harper, during the time of COVID, when the experiential work that I do kind of went away. When we're running cohorts through and our cohorts are about 20 to 25 people, when we're running cohorts through our leadership program, we've run that curriculum through the leadership forum, and those people earn a certificate of achievement validated by the leadership forum. And for each person that passes through, they get this certificate, and they get invited to be part of the leadership forum. So it's just an idea that I wanted to share with you all, and how can we build out, and most of these are people who are younger in their careers, going through some basic leadership skills. It might be a way to get more awareness of this group and more diversity and more inclusion of different age groups that should be represented here, of course, because we're all going to age out, and we need the next generation to pass through. So that's something that I'm happy to share with you, and we could talk about that offline. And I just want to say it's been enriching to always be here. It's always a challenge, busy lives, busy schedules, to be able to push through all the noise and to come down here. And I think, I don't know if I could do it this year. And then as soon as I'm in the room, I'm like, oh my, what was I thinking that I'm so busy? I'm such a busy fella. It's so much better to be here. And last night's exercise, for those of you who were here, was basically asking and answering questions. I would ask the questions, and the people were in pairs or triads would answer that question to each other. And some of them were deep questions, some of them were light questions, but it was a way for us to get to know and bond with each other. But really what it is, and I didn't get a chance to really do the debrief completely last night, it's really standing present with each other. And it's a way for people to be heard. And so the question that you ask about who's not in this room, those are people typically who are unseen, unheard all the time. And so we have to have that consciousness to be able to, who should be in the room, and let's make sure that we stand eyeball to eyeball, very present for them, and so to make sure that they feel heard. There could be no greater gift, no greater sign of respect for one human to another than to be present for each other. And so I just want to close my comments tonight with thank you for the presence that I've received from all of you, and I've seen the respect shared between each other. And so thank you to the organizers, and thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich, very much. I did want to say this, what you said really links back to what you said. How many people actually out in the world, that culture we're looking to change, have that, I'll call it duality, but it's not, that's not the right word, where they can both be acting in the world and at that level of consciousness or reflectivity, more or less at the same time. It takes development, as you said, of a muscle that many people here professionally actually have been trying to cultivate. It's never done, but you try on that. And I think it was really important that you shined a light on that, because that may be part of that route. What does it take to create that level of willingness to try to balance those two kinds of thinking at once? And can we start young, to your point, in bringing up a generation that's ready to do it, so it's a little bit easier when they get into positions of responsibility. Bill, you joined us, and then we're going to be winding it down a little bit. I know Lynette wanted to say something too.
I'll be brief. Some of you, well, my family knows that I like to quote songs. They roll their eyes, but there's only one person here who will roll her eyes when I do this. But this song has been rolling through my head almost the whole 2 or 3 days. It's a song about things we learned in kindergarten. Lyndon, I played this for you once. Remember the seed in the little paper cup. First, the roots go down, and then the plant grows up.